Close your eyes, feel the weight of your body settle, let the present moment fade away. Now, step backward through time, not years, not centuries, but thousands of years. Keep going, further, deeper into the past. You are standing somewhere you have never been. Somewhere no modern human has stood in living memory. Open your eyes. You are on the African savanna 70,000 years ago. The heat presses against your skin, a dry, ancient warmth that smells of dust and dry grass. The sun hangs heavy in a pale blue sky, untouched by smog or contrails. Silence stretches to the horizon, broken only by the low rumble of thunder 20 kilometers to the north and the chirp of invisible insects in the tall golden grass. Look around you. This is the cradle, the birthplace. The world is vast, wild, and teeming with life that dwarfs you. A herd of giant buffalo, Syncarus antiquus, moves slowly across the plain. Beasts with horns spanning 3 meters from tip to tip, their dark shapes cutting through the haze. In the distance, the silhouette of a lone acacia tree stands against the light, its flat canopy offering the only shade for miles. You are not alone here. Walking through the grass, moving with a silent predatory grace, is a small band of figures. They look like you. They have your hands, your eyes, your upright posture. But look closer. Their eyes scan the horizon with an intensity you have forgotten. They carry spears tipped with stone points, crafted with a precision that speaks of a mind at work, a mind that plans, predicts, and remembers. Watch them move. Their feet barely disturb the dust. Each step is purposeful. Each gesture a silent language shared between them. One raises a hand, palm flat, fingers spread, and the others freeze instantly. They have seen something you cannot. The flicker of movement in the grass 200 meters away, the shift of shadow that might be predator or prey. Their senses are tuned to frequencies you have lost in the noise of modern life. They smell the rain approaching before the clouds gather. They read the tracks of animals like you read words on a screen. Notice the tools they carry. Stone blades hafted to wooden shafts with sinew and plant resin. These are not crude implements. They are engineering achievements requiring foresight, patience, and transmitted knowledge. Someone had to teach them where to find the right stone, how to strike it at precisely the correct angle, and how to bind it securely so it would not fail at the moment of truth. This is culture in its infancy. This is memory-made material. These are your ancestors, Homo sapiens. But they are on the edge of something. For 200,000 years, humans like them have walked this continent, living simple lives using simple tools. They have survived droughts that turned great lakes into dust bowls. They have endured ice ages that locked the world's water in polar caps, dropping sea levels by 100 meters. They have persisted. But something is about to change. A spark is igniting in the darkness of prehistory. A revolution is coming. Not of weapons or fire, but of the mind. In caves along the southern coast, in the flicker of campfires under the Milky Way, a new kind of thought is emerging. The ability to imagine worlds that do not exist. To speak of things that are not present. To create art. To worship. To dream. What triggered this sudden explosion of creativity? Why, after 200,000 years of stability, did the human mind suddenly wake up? Was it a random genetic mutation, a single letter of DNA shifting in the dark? Was it the pressure of a changing climate forcing us to adapt or die? Or was it something else, something far more mysterious buried deep in our past? Tonight, we will walk the path of this awakening. We will travel back to the moment when humanity truly began. We will explore the ancient caves where the first symbols were etched into stone. We will follow the genetic trail that leads back to a single fragile population of survivors. And we will ask the question that haunts every archaeologist and philosopher who looks back at the deep time of our species. What really triggered the first human revolution? If you enjoy journeys like this one, consider subscribing. There's much more waiting for you. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must first look at the evidence left behind in the dust of history. The archaeological record is a book with many missing pages, but the fragments that remain tell a startling story. For decades, scientists believed that modern human behavior, art, complex tools, ritual, exploded suddenly around 40,000 years ago in Europe. They called it the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. But recent discoveries on the southern tip of Africa have rewritten that timeline. At Blombos Cave, overlooking the Indian Ocean, archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Buried in layers of sediment dated to 77,000 years ago, he found two small pieces of ochre, a soft, red, iron-rich stone. But these were not just raw materials. Their flat surfaces had been ground smooth, and etched into them was a clear geometric pattern, a crosshatch design, lines intersecting to form diamonds. This was not a doodle, it was a symbol, a deliberate design created to hold meaning. It is the oldest known example of abstract art in human history, predating the famous cave paintings of Europe by more than 35,000 years. It suggests that the cognitive revolution did not happen in a sudden flash in Europe, but was flickering to life much earlier, here on the jagged coastlines of Africa. Further west, at Pinnacle Point, the researcher Curtis Marion found evidence of an even earlier awakening. In caves perched high above the sea, dated to 164,000 years ago, he found small bladelets, tiny stone tools made from heat-treated rock. The process to create them required complex planning, finding the right stone, silkrete, building a sandpit fire to heat it to exactly 350 degrees Celsius, letting it cool slowly and then flaking it into razor-sharp blades. This is engineering. It requires an understanding of cause and effect, of transforming materials through invisible processes. It requires a mind that can plan days into the future. Richard Klein, a paleoanthropologist at Stanford University, has long argued that a genetic mutation around 50,000 years ago rewired the human brain, allowing for the sudden emergence of language and symbolic culture. He points to the sudden appearance of diverse artifacts, beads made from ostrich eggshells, bone tools shaped into needles and awls, and long-distance trade networks moving obsidian over 300 kilometers. But Sally McBratty and Alison Brooks challenged this Big Bang theory. They argued for a gradual accumulation of skills. They see the revolution not as a single event, but as a slow burn, a flickering candle that grew into a torch over tens of thousands of years. They point to the Middle Stone Age in Africa, spanning from 280,000 to 50,000 years ago, as the true crucible of our humanity. Genetics adds another layer to this mystery. Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute have mapped the Neanderthal genome, revealing that we share a common ancestor who lived roughly 600,000 years ago. But while Neanderthals had brains as large as ours, sometimes larger, their tool technology remained relatively static for hundreds of thousands of years. They didn't trade over long distances. They didn't create complex art. Something in the Homo sapiens lineage was different. A spark, a drive, a capacity for infinite novelty. What was it? We look to the FOXP2 gene, often called the language gene. We know that a specific mutation in this gene is shared by all modern humans but is absent in chimpanzees. It relates to the fine motor control of the mouth and larynx and to the cognitive processing of speech. Did this mutation spread through a small population of humans 70,000 years ago, unlocking the power of complex language, the power to say tomorrow, yesterday, if, and why? The timing is tantalizing. Molecular biologists estimate that the modern human variant of FOXP2 emerged sometime between 200,000 and 100,000 years ago, precisely the window when archaeological evidence begins to whisper of change. Yet the gene alone cannot be the full story. Neanderthals possessed an identical version of FOXP2, yet their cultural expressions remained constrained. This suggests the revolution required not a single mutation, but a constellation of changes, perhaps in how different brain regions connected to one another, how neurons fired in new patterns, how information flowed between the centers for memory, emotion, and abstract reasoning. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered a layer dated to 42,000 years ago, containing something extraordinary. A wooden digging stick with a deliberately shaped point, hardened by fire and worn smooth by use. Beside it lay a lump of beeswax mixed with plant resin, an ancient adhesive. This suggests not just tool use, but tool curation. Someone valued this implement enough to repair it, to maintain it, to pass it down. This is the archaeology of care, of foresight, of attachment to objects imbued with personal history. Yet perhaps the most haunting evidence comes not from tools or art, but from burial practices. At Blombos Cave in Israel, dated to approximately 92,000 years ago, archaeologists discovered the skeletal remains of a young child buried with red deer antlers placed deliberately in the child's hands. This was not a casual disposal of a body. This was ritual. This was grief made tangible. Someone mourned this child enough to send them into the next world, or the void, with a gift. This implies belief in something beyond the immediate, the physical. It suggests the first inklings of metaphysical thought. At Blombos Cave, also in Israel, another burial from roughly 100,000 years ago revealed a different kind of tenderness. The skeleton of an adult male was found in a fetal position, with the massive jaw of a wild boar resting on his arms. Analysis of the bones showed signs of a developmental disorder that would have left him partially disabled from childhood. Yet he lived to adulthood. Someone fed him, someone cared for him. This is evidence not just of symbolic thought, but of compassion, of a social contract that extended beyond mere survival utility. Archaeologist John Shea, studying stone tools from the Levantine corridor, has noted a subtle but significant shift in craftsmanship around 100,000 years ago. The tools become not just functional, but elegant. Symmetry appears where it is not strictly necessary for utility. Some hand axes are so finely made, so perfectly balanced, that they seem to have been crafted not just to cut, but to impress. This suggests the emergence of aesthetics, the idea that something can be valued not just for what it does, but for how it looks. Beauty entering the human equation. And then there is the matter of pigment. Ochre, iron oxide, ranging from yellow to deep red, appears in archaeological sites across Africa beginning around 300,000 years ago. But its use intensifies dramatically after 100,000 years ago. At Blombos Cave alone, over 8,000 pieces of ochre have been recovered. Why? Ochre has no obvious utilitarian purpose. It doesn't sharpen a blade. It doesn't make meat taste better. But it can be ground into powder, mixed with fat or water and applied to skin. It can create patterns. It can distinguish us from them. It can beautify, ritualize, mark moments of transition, birth, adulthood, death. Ochre is the color of the revolution, smeared across the skin of a species learning to see itself. The distribution of ochre tells a story beyond mere decoration. Chemical analysis reveals that some ochre pieces found at archaeological sites traveled over 200 kilometers from their geological source. This is not casual collection. This is trade. This is social networking. Someone in one valley valued red ochre enough to exchange something for it: food, tools, labor, or perhaps something more abstract like alliance or kinship ties. The movement of ochre across the landscape maps the invisible web of early human social connections, a network that grew denser and more complex as the cognitive revolution progressed. But the revolution's signature is not only found in what humans made, it is also written in what they consumed. At Clay's Rivermouth Caves on the southern coast of South Africa, archaeologists discovered something remarkable in layers dated to around 110,000 years ago. The remains of shellfish, thousands upon thousands of shells from marine mollusks. These were not washed ashore by tides. They were deliberately collected, transported inland, and consumed. The shells show cut marks and burn patterns consistent with cooking. This represents a profound cognitive shift. To exploit the ocean's resources requires an understanding of tides, of seasonal availability, of which species are edible and which are toxic. It requires the knowledge that certain shellfish are dangerous during specific months when red tide blooms poison their flesh. This knowledge cannot be learned through trial and error without casualties. It must be taught, remembered, and transmitted across generations through language. The shellfish middens of South Africa are monuments to the power of shared knowledge, to the emergence of a cultural memory that could store information more reliably than any individual brain. The invention of composite tools marks another threshold in cognitive evolution. At Symbolic Cave in South Africa, dated to approximately 70,000 years ago, researchers found evidence of sophisticated adhesive technology. Stone points were hafted to wooden shafts using a compound adhesive made from red ochre, plant gum, and ground speculariate, a glittering form of iron oxide. The recipe was precise. Too much ochre and the adhesive became brittle. Too little and it would not bind. The makers had to heat the mixture to exactly the right temperature, stirring constantly to achieve the correct consistency. This is not simple tool use. This is chemistry. This is experimental knowledge accumulated over generations, refined through countless failures. Someone had to remember the recipe. Someone had to teach it. Someone had to innovate when the traditional plant gum became scarce and a substitute had to be found. The composite tool represents the crystallization of cultural knowledge, a technology so complex that no single individual could reinvent it from scratch. You needed teachers, you needed language, you needed a society that valued expertise. The archaeological record also preserves evidence of something more ephemeral but equally significant, the emergence of personal identity. At the Grotte de Pigeon in Morocco, dated to approximately 82,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered dozens of perforated shell beads. These were not random shells with natural holes. Each was deliberately pierced, the edges smoothed by wear from being strung on cord and worn against skin or clothing. The pattern of wear is distinctive, asymmetrical, suggesting that these beads were worn on one side of the body more than the other, perhaps strung on a necklace that hung over one shoulder. These beads are identity made visible. They announce something about the wearer, status, lineage, achievement, or perhaps simply taste. In a world without mirrors, without photographs, without any permanent record of one's existence, these beads were how you presented yourself to others. They were the first fashion, the first deliberate self-expression through material culture. And like all fashion, they required a community that could read and interpret their meaning. A bead is useless if no one understands what it signifies. Language itself, though it leaves no direct fossil record, casts indirect shadows across the archaeological landscape. Linguist Noam Chomsky has long argued that all human languages share a deep underlying structure, a universal grammar hardwired into our brains. This suggests that language did not evolve gradually from simple to complex, but emerged relatively suddenly as a complete system. When language arrived, it arrived fully formed, capable of infinite recursive expression. I think that you believe that she knows. The genetic evidence supports this sudden emergence model. The FOXP2 gene variant unique to humans appears to have swept through the population rapidly, suggesting strong selective pressure. Those who could speak well outcompeted those who could not. Natural selection amplified the advantage of clear communication with ruthless efficiency. Within perhaps just a few thousand generations, barely a moment in evolutionary time, the ability to produce complex syntactical speech became universal in the human population. But what drove this selection pressure? What made language suddenly so valuable that those who lacked it were outcompeted? The answer may lie in the harsh climatic conditions of the late Pleistocene. As Africa cycled through periods of extreme drought and brief wet phases, survival required not just individual intelligence, but collective problem-solving. The band that could coordinate a complex hunt using precise verbal communication could bring down game that individuals could not. The group that could share knowledge about distant water sources could survive droughts that wiped out less communicative populations. Environmental archaeologist Curtis Marion has reconstructed the climate of southern Africa during the critical period between 195,000 and 125,000 years ago. His data reveals a world of staggering variability. Within a single human lifetime, rainfall could drop by 50% or more, turning lush grasslands into near desert. Lakes that had sustained communities for generations dried to cracked mud. Then, unpredictably, the rains would return and the landscape would transform again. This climatic chaos was the forge in which cognitive flexibility was hammered into the human genome. Those who could adapt their strategies, who could learn from the memories of elders about previous droughts, who could coordinate with neighboring bands to share resources during lean times, these were the ancestors of all modern humans. The revolution was not just cognitive, it was social. It was the recognition that survival required not just a clever mind, but a network of clever minds bound together by language, ritual, and shared belief. The archaeological site of Katanda in the Democratic Republic of Congo adds another piece to this puzzle. Dated to approximately 90,000 years ago, researchers uncovered sophisticated bone harpoons with barbed points, designed for fishing. These are not simple spears. The barbs are carefully carved to prevent a speared fish from wriggling free. The base is shaped to fit securely into a wooden shaft. These harpoons represent specialized technology, tools designed for a specific ecological niche. They suggest a level of planning and foresight that goes beyond opportunistic tool use. But they also suggest something more profound: the colonization of new cognitive territory. Fishing is different from hunting. Fish cannot be stalked, they cannot be tracked. They require patience, observation, and an understanding of underwater behavior that is invisible from the surface. To become effective fishers, humans had to develop a theory of mind that extended beyond their own species into the alien realm of aquatic life. They had to imagine what a fish might do, how it might react, where it might hide. This is abstract thinking applied to prediction. This is simulation. This is the mind turning inward to model the external world. The evidence is fragmentary, like whispers caught in the wind. A bead here, a bone tool there, a scratch on a stone. But together they form a mosaic of a mind waking up. A species moving from merely existing in the world to analyzing it, describing it, and reshaping it. And yet, for all this evidence of gradual accumulation, there remains something abrupt about the transition. Between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, the archaeological record shifts from a trickle to a flood. Suddenly, artifacts proliferate, art appears in profusion, burials become elaborate, long-distance trade networks explode across landscapes. Something changed, something accelerated. Whether it was the final genetic piece falling into place, or the reaching of a critical population threshold, or the survival bottleneck imposed by Toba, or some combination of all these factors, the revolution reached a tipping point. And once it crossed that threshold, there was no going back. The cognitive revolution was irreversible. The mind that could imagine the future could not forget how to do so. The species that had tasted symbolic thought could not return to pure instinct. Humanity had lit a fire that would never go out, a flame that would burn brighter with each passing generation, illuminating the darkness of deep time with the light of consciousness. We had become something new, something unprecedented, something that would reshape the planet and, one day, reach beyond it into the stars. Let us return to that world, the stage upon which this drama unfolded. 70,000 years ago, the Earth was in the grip of the last glacial period. While massive ice sheets buried northern Europe and North America under kilometers of frozen water, Africa was experiencing a different kind of extreme. It was drying out. The lush rainforests had retreated, replaced by vast, arid savannas and expanding deserts. Imagine the Great Rift Valley, a scar running down the face of the continent. Here, the landscape is a patchwork of golden grasslands, acacia woodlands, and shimmering lakes that expand and contract with the millennia. The air vibrates with heat. The ground is hard, baked red by the equatorial sun. This is a land of giants and ghosts. Homo sapiens are not the only humans here. To the north, in Europe and parts of Asia, with the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, are masters of the cold. Stocky, powerful, with barrel chests and prominent brow ridges, they hunt mammoths and woolly rhinos in the tundra. Further east, the Denisovans roam the caves of Siberia and the high plateaus of Tibet. In the islands of Southeast Asia, the tiny Homo floresiensis, hobbits, hunt dwarf elephants in tropical forests. But in Africa, it is us, anatomically modern humans. We are taller, more slender than our Neanderthal cousins. Our skulls are high and rounded, housing a brain that is architecturally distinct. We live in small bands, 30 to 50 individuals, bound by kinship. We are nomads, following the rains and the herds. Listen to the sounds of this world. The deep, guttural roar of a lion in the night, Panthera leo, but larger than the ones we know today. The trumpeting of elephants echoing off canyon walls. The crackle of a fire as the sun sets, painting the sky in violet and orange. The soft murmur of voices, proto-language perhaps, or a complex system of gestures and sounds that carries meaning in the flicker of the flames. Stand at the edge of Lake Malawi in the dawn light. The water stretches to the horizon, mirror still, reflecting the pale lavender sky. Flocks of flamingos wade in the shallows, their pink forms creating ripples that catch the first rays of sun. Along the shoreline, Hippopotamus gorgops, a species now extinct, emerge from the water, their massive bodies glistening wet. These beasts are larger than their modern descendants, weighing over 4 tons with elongated skulls and eyes that sit high on their heads like periscopes. The air is thick with moisture here at the water's edge, a stark contrast to the arid plains just a kilometer inland. Mosquitoes hum in clouds, dragonflies dart over the reeds. This is a refuge, a place where life concentrates when the dry season grips the land. Human bands return here year after year, following paths worn into the earth by countless generations. They know which rocks shelter the best tool-making stone. They know which trees produce resin for hafting. They know the stories embedded in this landscape. Move inland, away from the lake. The grass grows taller here, Themida triandra, red oat grass, standing shoulder-high in some places. Walking through it is dangerous. Visibility drops to a few meters. Anything could be hiding, a leopard coiled in ambush, a black mamba sunning itself on a rock, or worse, a band of rival humans, the territorial and wary of strangers. Trust does not extend beyond the known. Every face outside your band is a potential threat. The megafauna of this era are both resource and terror. There are species here that would dwarf anything alive today. The African elephant of this time, Paleoloxodon retzki, stands 4 meters at the shoulder, with tusks that sweep upward in elegant curves, each weighing over 100 kilograms. These giants move through the acacia woodlands like living mountains, stripping bark from trees, their intelligence evident in the careful way they use their trunks to test branches before pulling them down. And then there are the predators. Alongside the familiar lion and leopard, there are creatures that haunt the twilight hours with terrifying efficiency. The giant hyena, Pachyrhocutta brevirostris, is the size of a modern lioness but built like a tank, with bone-crushing jaws capable of snapping a human femur like a twig. They are not mere scavengers, they are apex hunters, working in coordinated packs to bring down prey as large as juvenile elephants. At night, their whooping calls echo across the savannah, a sound that triggers an instinctive terror in every human who hears it. The climate is not stable. Even within a human lifetime, you can witness dramatic shifts. A decade of good rains can turn the desert green, filling ancient lake beds and bringing vast herds of grazing animals, wildebeest, zebra, and the now extinct giant buffalo Syncerus antiquus. Then the rains fail. Year after year, the clouds pass overhead without releasing their burden. The lakes shrink to muddy puddles. The grass turns brittle and brown. Other herds move on, and the humans must move with them or die. Life is hard. Life is fragile. A broken leg is a death sentence. A drought can wipe out an entire lineage. Child mortality is high. Half of all children never reach adulthood. But there is beauty too. The coolness of a cave after a day in the sun. The taste of roasted meat shared around a communal fire. The rhythmic chanting of the group as they prepare for a hunt. The feeling of belonging. Consider a single day in the life of this world. Dawn breaks cold. The stars, vastly more visible than in our light-polluted modern nights, fade one by one as the eastern sky turns from black to deep blue to gold. The air is sharp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked earth and the distant musk of animals. The band wakes slowly, de-emerging from rock shelters or thorn branch enclosures built to keep out predators. The fire from the previous night has burned down to embers. Someone, perhaps a young woman skilled in the art of firekeeping, coaxes it back to life with dry grass and careful breath. Fire is precious. Losing it means days of effort to create it anew, striking pyrite against flint, nursing the tiny spark into a coal, feeding it with the softest tinder. Fire is warmth. Fire is safety. Fire is the center of human existence. The men prepare for the hunt. They check their spears, running fingers along the edges of stone points to test sharpness. They smear themselves with ash and animal fat, partly for camouflage, partly for protection from the sun and insects, partly for reasons that may be ritual, symbolic, the meaning lost to time. They set out in silence, reading the land with eyes trained from childhood, the bent grass that marks where an antelope passed, the freshness of dung that tells how long ago the herd moved through, the warning calls of birds that signal a predator ahead. The women and children remain at the camp, but they are not idle. They gather. Gathering provides the majority of calories. Tubers dug from the hard earth with digging sticks, mongongo nuts cracked open with stones, wild melons, bitter but hydrating. They know hundreds of plants by name and property. Which roots are edible, which are poison, which leaves can stop bleeding, which bark can ease fever. This knowledge is survival, passed from mother to daughter in a chain stretching back millennia. The hunt may take hours or days. Success is never guaranteed. But when it comes, a young kudu brought down with a spear through the ribs, there is jubilation. The meat is butchered on site, the choicest cuts carried back, wrapped in the animal's own hide. Nothing is wasted. The sinew becomes cord for binding. The bones are cracked for marrow. The stomach is cleaned and used as a water container. The hide will be scraped, dried, and worn or used to create shelter. As the sun descends toward the western horizon, Painting the sky in bands of orange, pink, and deep purple, the band gathers around the fire once more. The meat roasts on hot stones. Fat drips and hisses, sending up plumes of fragrant smoke. Laughter ripples through the group. Children wrestle in the dust. An elder sits apart, working a piece of ochre with a grinding stone, reducing it to powder for purposes we can only guess. Body decoration? Hide tanning, or perhaps something more symbolic. Night falls swiftly in the tropics. The stars emerge in their millions, the Milky Way a river of light arching overhead. The fire burns bright, a small sphere of warmth and light in an immense darkness. In that darkness, eyes reflect the firelight, pairs of green or amber, watching from just beyond the reach of the flames. The night is alive with sounds, the soaring cough of a leopard, the distant yipping of jackals, the rustle of wind through grass, and the steady, ancient hum of insects. This is the world. This is the crucible. Every day is a negotiation with death, and yet every evening is a victory. To sit by the fire, belly full, surrounded by kin beneath the vast African sky. This is what it means to be human. Not yet questioning, not yet creating art or worshipping gods, but alive. Intensely, preciously alive. Consider a single day in the life of this world. Dawn breaks cold. The stars, vastly more visible than in our light-polluted modern nights, fade one by one as the eastern sky turns from black to deep blue to gold. The air is sharp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked earth and the distant musk of animals. The band wakes slowly, emerging from rock shelters or thorn-branch enclosures built to keep out predators. The fire from the previous night has burned down to embers. Someone, perhaps a young woman skilled in the art of firekeeping, coaxes it back to life with dry grass and careful breath. Fire is precious. Losing it means days of effort to create it anew, striking pyrite against flint, nursing the tiny spark into a coal, feeding it with the softest tinder. Fire is warmth. Fire is safety. Fire is the center of human existence. The men prepare for the hunt. They check their spears, running fingers along the edges of stone points to test sharpness. They smear themselves with ash and animal fat, partly for camouflage, partly for protection from the sun and insects, partly for reasons that may be ritual, symbolic, the meaning lost to time. They set out in silence, reading the land with eyes trained from childhood, the bent grass that marks where an antelope passed, the freshness of dung that tells how long ago the herd moved through, the warning calls of birds that signal a predator ahead. The women and children remain at the camp, but they are not idle. They gather. Gathering provides the majority of calories. Tubers dug from the hard earth with digging sticks, mongongo nuts cracked open with stones, wild melons, bitter but hydrating. They know hundreds of plants by name and property, which roots are edible, which are poison, which leaves can stop bleeding, which bark can ease fever. This knowledge is survival, passed from mother to daughter in a chain stretching back millennia. The hunt may take hours or days. Success is never guaranteed. But when it comes, a young kudu brought down with a spear through the ribs, there is jubilation. The meat is butchered on site, the choicest cuts carried back, wrapped in the animal's own hide. Nothing is wasted. The sinew becomes cord for binding. The bones are cracked for marrow. The stomach is cleaned and used as a water container. The hide will be scraped, dried, and worn or used to create shelter. As the sun descends toward the western horizon, painting the sky in bands of orange, pink, and deep purple, so the band gathers around the fire once more. The meat roasts on the hot stones. Fat drips and hisses, sending up plumes of fragrant smoke. Laughter ripples through the group. Children wrestle in the dust. An elder sits apart, working a piece of ochre with a grinding stone, reducing it to powder for purposes we can only guess. Body decoration, hide tanning, or perhaps something more symbolic. Night falls swiftly in the tropics. The stars emerge in their millions, the Milky Way a river of light arching overhead. The fire burns bright, a small sphere of warmth and light in an immense darkness. In that darkness, eyes reflect the firelight, pairs of green or amber watching from just beyond the reach of the flames. The night is alive with sounds, the sawing cough of a leopard, the distant yipping of jackals, the rustle of wind through grass, and the steady, ancient hum of insects. This is the world. This is the crucible. Every day is a negotiation with death, and yet every evening is a victory. To sit by the fire, belly full, surrounded by kin, beneath the vast African sky. This is what it means to be human. Not yet questioning, not yet creating art or worshipping gods, but alive, intensely, preciously alive. The environment shapes the mind. In the fluctuating climate of Africa, where mega-droughts could last for centuries, adaptability was the greatest weapon. When the lakes dried up, you had to move. You had to remember where the waterholes were from stories told by your elders. You had to innovate new ways to store water in ostrich eggshells, burying them in the sand for the return journey. This pressure cooker of climate instability may have been the engine of evolution. Those who could solve new problems survived. Those who could communicate complex ideas. The herd has moved to the valley behind the Twin Peaks, survived. Those who could build social networks with neighboring groups, trading obsidian for ochre, trading mates for alliances, survived. It was a world of deep time. Days blended into seasons, seasons into lifetimes. There were no clocks, no calendars, only the cycles of the moon, the migration of the wildebeest, the rising of the Pleiades. In this timeless rhythm, something new began to stir, a questioning, a looking inward. But before that stirring, there was simply existence. Let us linger in this world a moment longer, feeling the texture of life before consciousness fully awoke. The rhythms were ancient, carved into the genes by millions of years of iteration. Wake at dawn, forage, hunt, gather at dusk, sleep when darkness falls. Repeat until death. This was not monotony. That would require the capacity to compare one day to another and find them the same. It was simply the pattern of being. The dangers were constant and intimate. A child playing too far from the group might be snatched by a leopard in seconds, her screams swallowed by distance before anyone could react. An elder, slowed by age and an old injury to the hip, would struggle to keep pace during the seasonal migrations. One day, unable to continue, he would sit beneath a tree and wave the others onward. They would leave him there, not from cruelty, but from necessity. The band moved with the herds or starved. There was no carrying capacity for those who could not walk. Disease was a mystery wrapped in terror. A cut on the foot, seemingly minor, but could become infected. The flesh would swell, turn hot, emit a foul smell. Fever would follow. Sometimes the person recovered, often they did not. There was no understanding of bacteria, no concept of infection. The wound was simply bad luck, or perhaps the work of malevolent spirits. Though even that level of abstract thinking was still emerging, still flickering at the edges of consciousness. Childbirth was a moment of profound vulnerability. Women gave birth in the shelter of caves or beneath rock overhangs, attended by other women who had themselves survived the ordeal. Many did not. Hemorrhage, breech births, infections. The causes were unknown, but the outcome was final. A woman might labor for days before dying, her infant dying with her or shortly after. The surviving band members would move on, with their grief immediate but not prolonged. Life had to continue. The living always moved forward. Yet there were also moments of transcendent beauty that pierced the veil of simple survival. Standing on a hillside at dawn, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and rose, while below you a herd of eland moved like a river of dark bodies flowing across the grassland. The first taste of honey, found in a tree hollow, its sweetness so intense it seemed almost painful. The feeling of cool water on burning feet after a day of walking across hot sand. These moments registered not as beauty, that word implies aesthetic judgment, but as visceral pleasure, as rightness, as a brief alignment between desire and reality. Social bonds were the invisible architecture of survival. A mother grooming her daughter's hair, picking through it methodically for ticks and lice, her fingers gentle and patient. Two hunters sitting side by side in companionable silence, repairing their spears, their movements synchronized through years of working together. The way the entire band would erupt in laughter when a child did something clumsy but endearing, tripping over his own feet while trying to imitate the men's hunting crouch. These bonds were not romanticized or articulated. They simply were as fundamental as breath. Conflict, too, was woven into the fabric of existence. Resources were finite. Waterholes that could support one band might not support two. When bands encountered each other at such places, tension crackled in the air. Most times, both groups would drink their fill and move on, avoiding confrontation. But sometimes, especially during droughts, when water was precious and territory was everything, violence erupted. Stones were thrown, spears were brandished. Occasionally, blood was spilled. The survivors remembered these encounters as moments of extreme alertness, of every sense heightened, but not as narratives with clear causes and moral lessons. They were simply part of the dangerous texture of the world. The relationship with other species was complex, built on observation and learned caution. Certain birds, the honey guide for instance, were allies. If you followed the bird's calls, it would lead you to a beehive. You would smoke out the bees, take the honey, and leave the wax for the bird. This relationship was ancient, encoded in behavior but not in language. No one told stories about the first human who trusted a honey guide. It was simply knowledge, as instinctive as knowing which plants were food and which were poison. Lions were respected with a fear that bordered on awe. At night, when their roars echoed across the savannah, children pressed closer to their mothers. The fire was built higher. Everyone knew that a healthy adult lion would rarely attack a human. We were too unpredictable, too likely to fight back. But lions, desperate or wounded, were different. They would stalk a human as deliberately as they stalked any other prey. The bands developed strategies over generations. Never walk alone at twilight, carry fire whenever possible, make noise to announce your presence. These strategies were transmitted through imitation and correction, not through explicit instruction. The elephants were viewed with a mixture of fear and something approaching reverence. They were too large to hunt effectively with Stone Age weapons. A spear might penetrate the thick hide, but would rarely reach a vital organ. Wounded elephants were extraordinarily dangerous, capable of trampling an entire hunting party in their rage and pain. So humans and elephants maintained a wary distance, circling around each other in the landscape, sharing resources but rarely competing directly. When an elephant died of old age or injury and the scavengers had finished with it, humans would sometimes harvest the tusks or bones for tools. But they did not seek out elephants. The risk was too great. Snakes were perhaps the most feared creatures in this world, and for good reason. A bite from a black mamba or puff adder could kill within hours, and there was no cure, no treatment, no hope. The venom attacked the nervous system or caused massive internal bleeding. The victim would seize, vomit, and die in agony while the band watched helplessly. This fear of snakes left such a deep imprint on the human psyche that even today, tens of thousands of years later, we instinctively recoil from serpentine shapes. Our ancestors who were slow to fear snakes did not become our ancestors. The weather was not something to be predicted, only endured. When the rains came, they came suddenly and with overwhelming force. The dry riverbeds would transform into raging torrents within minutes, sweeping away anything in their path. humans learned to camp on high ground, to read the sky for the particular quality of clouds that preceded a storm, to seek shelter in caves when the thunder approached. But sometimes the storms caught people in the open. Lightning strikes killed instantly, leaving behind bodies that the survivors regarded with confused horror. What force could reach down from the sky and kill without warning, without giving any chance to flee? The dry season brought different terrors. As water became scarce, competition intensified. The remaining waterholes attracted animals from miles around, creating a dangerous concentration of predators and prey. Humans would approach these water sources with extreme caution, waiting until the larger animals had drunk and moved away before darting in to fill their ostrich eggshell containers and flee. Sometimes, in the most severe droughts, the waterholes dried up completely. Then, the choices were stark. Migrate to a new territory, risking conflict with the bands already living there, or remain and hope that the rains would come in time. Many did not survive these choices. Food preservation was limited but crucial. Meat could be dried in the sun, cut into thin strips and left to desiccate until it became hard and fibrous but stable for weeks. This dried meat was survival insurance, carried in leather pouches and eaten during lean times. Mongongo nuts and other gathered foods could be stored in cache sites, hidden locations marked by distinctive rock formations or tree configurations that the band could remember and return to. But storage was always risky. Other animals might find the caches, insects might infest them, rain might rot them. The bands lived always on the edge, never more than a few days away from hunger. And yet, amidst all this hardship, there was something else beginning to emerge. In the quiet moments by the fire, when bellies were full and the immediate threats had receded, something stirred in the human mind. A woman might trace a pattern in the dust with her finger, not deliberately, not with artistic intent, but simply because the motion pleased her. A man might notice that a certain combination of stones made a pleasing sound when struck together. These were the first flickers of something new, something that went beyond survival. They were the earliest hints of the aesthetic sense, the capacity to appreciate pattern and beauty for their own sake, not because they helped you survive, but simply because they resonated with something deep in the newly awakening consciousness. And so we arrive at the precipice. The question that hangs over the deep history of our species like a storm cloud. What really triggered the first human revolution? Why did we change? For over 200,000 years, Homo sapiens existed. We looked like us. We had brains the same size as us, but we behaved differently. Our tools remained largely the same for millennia. Our societies were small, isolated pockets of humanity. Then, the shift, the acceleration, the great leap forward. Why? Was it a biological switch? Did a chance mutation in the architecture of our brains suddenly connect the regions responsible for memory, language, and abstract thought? Did we suddenly gain the ability to cross-domain think, to apply the intelligence we used for understanding nature to the intelligence we used for social interaction? To see a rock not just as a tool, but as a symbol? Or was it a social revolution? Did our populations reach a critical density where ideas could bounce between minds like sparks in a tinderbox? Did we invent culture as a way to store information outside of our brains, in stories, in songs, in the patterns of beads sewn onto clothing? Or was it catastrophe? Did we come so close to extinction that only the most creative, the most cooperative, the most imaginative survivors were left to rebuild the species? Did we walk through the valley of the shadow of death and emerge changed? Consider the weight of this question. For nearly 200 millennia, anatomically modern humans walked the earth looking largely as we do now. The fossils from 200,000 years ago show the same gracile skeletons, the same high foreheads, the same vocal anatomy capable of producing complex speech. Yet the archaeological signature is sparse. Simple stone tools, occasional use of ochre, no grand monuments, no elaborate burials, no explosion of artistic expression, just survival, just persistence. And then, in what is barely a blink in geological time, perhaps across just 20,000 years between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, everything changes. The toolkit expands exponentially. Bone needles appear, suggesting tailored clothing. Shell beads are strung together and traded across vast distances. Cave walls become canvases. The dead are buried with ceremony and care. Music enters the world. Flutes carved from bird bones, their haunting notes still playable today after 40,000 years of silence. What invisible threshold did we cross? Was there a tipping point, a moment when quantity transformed into quality? With some anthropologists speak of cognitive fluidity, the breaking down of mental barriers between different domains of knowledge. Before the revolution, a human might understand that a sharp stone cuts meat and that social relationships require care, but these thoughts lived in separate compartments. After the revolution, connections began to form. The sharp stone became a metaphor. He is sharp. Language became layered with meaning. Metaphor was born, or perhaps the answer lies not in biology, but in demography. Computer models suggest that culture accumulates not linearly, but exponentially. When human populations are small and scattered, innovations are lost almost as quickly as they appear. One clever person invents a better fishing technique, but dies before passing it on. The knowledge vanishes. But when populations grow and interconnect, when bands begin to meet regularly, to trade, to intermarry, ideas have stickiness. They spread, they combine, they mutate into new forms. Culture reaches a critical mass and begins to self-replicate. Yet there is a darker possibility that haunts the edges of this story. What if the revolution was forged in the crucible of near extinction? What if we were pushed to the absolute brink, and only those with the most powerful minds, the deepest capacity for cooperation and innovation, survived the bottleneck? Evolution does not care about the average, it cares about survival. In a world where 99% of the population dies, the 1% who remain become the ancestors of all future generations. If the 1% who survived possessed a rare combination of traits, language, abstract thought, long-term planning, then their genes become universal. The revolution was not gradual, it was violent, it was a filter. The answer may lie in a disaster of unimaginable scale. A global event that choked the sky, cooled the planet, and brought humanity to its knees. An event that reset the board and forced us to become something new. 74,000 years ago, on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, a mountain exploded. The Toba supervolcano eruption was the largest volcanic event in the last 2 million years. It blasted 2,800 cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the atmosphere. To put that in perspective, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens ejected just 1 cubic kilometer. Toba was 2,800 times larger. Imagine standing 1,000 kilometers away on the day it happened. You would have heard nothing at first. The sound would take nearly an hour to reach you, traveling across the curve of the Earth. But you would have seen the column. A pillar of darkness rising into the stratosphere, reaching heights of 40 kilometers, piercing the boundary between the troposphere and the realm of thin, frozen air where nothing lives. The column would mushroom outward, spreading like a hand reaching across the sky, blotting out the sun continent by continent. Within hours, the first ash began to fall. Fine particles, pumice dust lighter than snow, drifting down in silence. At first, it would seem almost beautiful, grey flakes swirling in the air like a strange, colourless winter. But then it kept falling, for days, for weeks, accumulating, choking. In parts of India, the ash layer would eventually reach 6 meters deep, enough to bury a 2-story building. Rivers turned to sludge. Lakes filled in and vanished. The fertile land became a wasteland of grey powder. But ash was only the beginning. The sulfur dioxide ejected into the stratosphere, an estimated 800 million tons, formed a veil around the planet. This aerosol cloud reflected sunlight back into space. Within months, global temperatures dropped. The models suggest a drop of 3 to 5 degrees Celsius on average, but in some regions, especially at higher latitudes, the cooling may have been as extreme as 10 to 15 degrees. A volcanic winter gripped the Earth. The sky turned black. Ash fell like snow across India and the Indian Ocean, blanketing the ground in layers 6 meters deep. Global temperatures plummeted by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius instantly. A volcanic winter descended on the planet, lasting for 6 to 10 years. Photosynthesis slowed. Plants died. Herbivores starved. The food web collapsed. In Africa, thousands of kilometers from the eruption, the impact was devastating but indirect. The skies dimmed. Sunlight became diffuse, weak, filtered through a haze of volcanic aerosols. Plants struggled to photosynthesize. Grasslands withered. The great herds, wildebeest, zebra, buffalo, began to die off. With the herbivores gone, the predators followed. Lions starved, hyenas turned to scavenging the dead, and then they too began to perish. For humans, small bands scattered across the African landscape. This was an apocalypse. The hunting grounds dried up. The waterholes went foul with ash. Children cried from hunger. Elders weakened and died. Entire lineages, families that had persisted for tens of thousands of years, simply ended. The archaeological record from this period is eerily thin. Tools become scarce. Campsites vanish. It is as if humanity flickered like a candle in a storm, nearly extinguished. Some scientists argue about the severity of the Toba bottleneck. Did it truly push humanity to the brink, or was it merely one crisis among many in an already harsh Ice Age world? The genetic evidence is debated. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA, passed down through the maternal line, suggests a severe population crash around 70,000 to 80,000 years ago, consistent with Toba's timeline. But other studies point to regional variation, suggesting some populations may have been more resilient than others. What is undeniable is that something changed. Whether it was Toba or the cumulative pressure of millennia of climate instability, or some combination of factors we may never fully understand, humanity emerged from this crucible transformed. The survivors were not a random sample. They were the innovators, the cooperators, the ones who could adapt their strategies, share resources, communicate complex plans. They were the ones who looked at a coastline and thought, we can survive here on shellfish and seabirds while the inland dies. Genetic studies suggest that around this time, the human population crashed. We went through a bottleneck. Some estimates suggest there were as few as 2,000 to 10,000 breeding pairs of humans left on the entire planet. We were an endangered species. We were on the brink of vanishing forever, just another failed experiment in the history of life. Picture them, these few thousand souls, huddled on the southern coast of Africa. Perhaps in the caves of Pinnacle Point, where the ocean provided a constant source of food immune to the volcanic winter inland. Perhaps along the shores of ancient Lake Malawi. They spoke in the dim firelight, gestures, sounds, perhaps the first true sentences. They shared food not just with kin, but with the stranger, because survival demanded every hand. They innovated. Someone thought to heat-treat stones to make them sharper. Someone else invented a new way to fish. Someone sang a song to keep the children calm in the darkness. This was natural selection at its most brutal and efficient. Those without the cognitive flexibility to adapt, those who clung to the old ways, the old hunting grounds, the old tools, perished. Their genes vanished from history. But those with the spark, language, abstract thought, cooperation, creativity, they survived. And when the volcanic winter finally ended, when the skies cleared and the rains returned, These survivors emerged into a world emptied of competition. They multiplied, they spread, they carried the seeds of the revolution with them. But we didn't vanish. The survivors, huddled in refuges in Africa, perhaps along the rich coastlines where shellfish provided a steady food source, were the ancestors of every single person alive today. And it is from this bottleneck, this near-death experience, that the new human emerged. The pressure to survive forged a new kind of mind, a mind capable of extreme cooperation, a mind capable of radical innovation. If this story is carrying you somewhere peaceful, feel free to close your eyes. The narration will guide you. Let us imagine the spiral of events that followed, with the chain reaction of the mind. In the aftermath of Toba, or perhaps driven by the long climatic squeeze of the African megadroughts, small bands of humans began to change how they lived. The first step was likely language, not just grunts and gestures, but syntactical language, the ability to combine sounds into infinite meanings. With language, you could plan a hunt 3 days in advance. You could explain to your child which berries were poisonous without them having to taste them. You could tell stories of the ancestors, binding the group together with a shared history. Language was the social glue that allowed larger groups to function without falling into chaos. This development of language likely intertwined with the emergence of symbolic thinking, the ability to let one thing stand for another. Gyred line on a rock stands for danger, or water, or us. A bead carved from a shell stands for friendship, or status. This is the birth of the abstract world, the world of ideas that exists parallel to the physical world. Social complexity grew. British anthropologist Robin Dunbar has proposed that the human brain evolved to handle social groups of about 150 individuals, Dunbar's number. As groups grew larger than this, we needed new ways to maintain social cohesion. We couldn't groom everyone like chimpanzees do. There wasn't enough time. So we used language, gossip, storytelling, singing to groom many people at once. We used symbols, body paint, jewelry, distinct tool styles to signal I am part of this tribe. Innovation accelerated. Tools became specialized. Instead of one heavy hand axe for everything, we made tiny microliths, small, sharp stone blades that could be hafted onto wood to make spears, arrows, and sickles. We invented the atlatl, or spear thrower, increasing our killing range and safety. We invented fishhooks and nets, unlocking the protein of the sea. As the mind expanded, so did our reach. About 60,000 years ago, a wave of these new humans, the survivors, the innovators, left Africa. They crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into Arabia, or moved up the Nile corridor into the Levant. They carried with them their new tools, their new language, their new mind. The journey out of Africa was not a sudden migration, but a slow tide spreading over millennia. These were not refugees fleeing disaster, but explorers drawn by curiosity and pushed by population pressure. Each generation moved a little further, of following coastlines where shellfish were abundant or river valleys where game was plentiful. They walked an average of perhaps 5 kilometers per generation, barely noticeable in a human lifetime, but unstoppable over thousands of years. As they moved, they adapted with astonishing speed. In the tropical coasts of India, they learned to build boats from reeds and navigate the shallow seas. In the Arabian deserts, they developed techniques for tracking water underground, reading the landscape for the telltale signs of moisture beneath the sand. When they reached the forests of Southeast Asia, they invented new hunting strategies for prey that lived in trees rather than on open ground. Each environment was a puzzle, and the new human mind excelled at solving puzzles. By 50,000 years ago, humans had reached Australia. This required crossing at least 90 kilometers of open ocean, a journey that demanded not just boats, but navigation, planning, and the social organization to coordinate dozens of people for a venture into the unknown. This was no accident. This was intentional. Someone stood on a beach, looked at the horizon and said, "What is over there?" and then convinced others to find out. In Australia, they encountered a world unlike any they had seen. Giant marsupials, Diprotodon, the size of a hippopotamus, and the carnivorous Thylacoleo, a lion-like predator with bolt-cutter jaws. Within a few thousand years of human arrival, most of these megafauna were extinct. Whether through hunting, habitat modification through fire, or some combination, the new humans reshaped the ecosystem. They were no longer just adapting to their environment. They were transforming it. Meanwhile, in Europe and Western Asia, the Neanderthals watched the newcomers arrive. We now know, through genetic analysis, that there was contact. Humans and Neanderthals interbred. Today, anyone with ancestry outside of Africa carries between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genome. These were not separate species incapable of mixing. They were divergent populations that had spent 400,000 years evolving in different environments, yet could still recognize each other as kin, at least sometimes. But the integration was limited. For the most part, the two populations remained separate, competing for the same caves, the same hunting grounds, the same resources. And in this competition, Homo sapiens had an edge. Not in strength, Neanderthals were more robust, better adapted to the cold. Not in brain size, Neanderthal brains were sometimes larger. The edge was social and technological. Humans had larger social networks, more sophisticated weapons, and perhaps most importantly, more flexible thinking. They encountered the Neanderthals in Europe and the Denisovans in Asia. These cousins were strong, adapted, and intelligent. But they lacked the social network, the projectile weapons, the fluid adaptability of the newcomers. Over the next few thousand years, the Neanderthals retreated. They vanished into the mountains, their fires flickering out one by one. By 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens stood alone. Let us pause on this moment. The extinction of the Neanderthals was not a genocide in the modern sense. There were no armies, no coordinated campaigns of extermination. It was more subtle, more gradual. Imagine two groups living in the same valley. The humans, with their superior social networks, could call on allies from neighboring valleys when resources grew scarce. The Neanderthals, more solitary, could not. Over generations, the humans slowly occupied the best hunting grounds, the richest territories. The Neanderthal birth rate declined, perhaps from stress, from reduced nutrition, from the steady erosion of their living space. They faded not with a bang, but with a whimper, until one day the last Neanderthal elder died and there was no one left to remember their songs. The expansion of our cognitive landscape was not merely about survival tools or hunting strategies. It fundamentally reshaped our internal universe. As language grew more complex, it created a feedback loop with our perception of time. With words for yesterday and tomorrow, we became the first creatures to mentally time travel. We could learn from a mistake made a year ago and plan for a harvest months in the future. This mental time travel is the bedrock of anxiety and hope, the twin engines of human ambition. Time became a landscape we could navigate. With language, we could revisit the past through stories. Do you remember the winter when the river froze and we crossed to the other side and found the herd? Memory became shared. A single individual's experience became the tribe's collective knowledge, and this collective memory allowed for cumulative culture, each generation building on the innovations of the last, rather than starting from scratch. The future, too, opened up. With language, we could rehearse scenarios that had not yet happened. If we build a fence here, the animals will funnel through this gap and we can ambush them. This ability to simulate the future gave humans an extraordinary advantage. We could fail in our minds rather than in reality. We could test ideas with words before testing them with our lives. But this gift came with a cost. To live in the past and future is to be partially absent from the present. The animals around us lived in a state of continuous now. alert, present, immediate. We had traded that presence for foresight and hindsight, gaining power but losing something essential. We became the anxious animal, the planning animal, the remembering and regretting animal. The revolution that made us masters of the earth also exiled us from the garden of pure being. Consider the profound shift in our relationship with the unseen. Once we could speak of things not physically present, we populated the empty spaces of the world with unseen forces. The wind was no longer just air, it was breath. The thunder was a voice. This animistic thinking, seeing agency in nature, was perhaps the first form of scientific hypothesis. It was an attempt to explain the why of the world. Why did the herd move? Because the spirit of the buffalo was offended. It may not be modern science, but it is the same cognitive machinery. Observing a pattern, positing a cause, and testing a response. This cognitive leap from what to why separated us forever from the rest of the animal kingdom. A lion knows that a gazelle runs when it approaches. But the lion does not ask why the gazelle runs, nor does it contemplate whether the gazelle has a choice. Humans, mine with their new language-soaked brains, began to see intention everywhere. The river flooded not because of rain in the mountains, but because the river was angry. The child died not from fever, but because a spirit was displeased. This was not stupidity. This was the inevitable consequence of a mind evolved to detect agency. In the evolutionary environment of the African savanna, it was better to mistake a shadow for a predator than to mistake a predator for a shadow. Our brains became hyperactive agent detectors, seeing patterns and intentions even where none existed. This tendency, this overactive agency detection, became the foundation for animism and later for religion. Rituals began to emerge. If we believe that the spirits control the hunt, then it makes sense to appease the spirits before hunting. Ochre is smeared on the body. A dance is performed, a chant is sung, and if the hunt succeeds, the ritual is reinforced. We did the ritual and we ate. Therefore, the ritual works. Never mind the times the ritual failed. Those are explained away as errors in performance or offenses to the spirits. The human mind, having unlocked causal thinking, began to see causation even in coincidence. But here is the extraordinary thing. These rituals worked. Not because the spirits were real, but because the rituals synchronized the group. When everyone performed the same dance, sang the same song, smeared the same ochre, they became united. They moved as one. The hunt became coordinated not through explicit verbal commands, but through shared rhythm, shared belief, shared identity. Ritual was the software that ran on the hardware of our hypersocial brains. This shared belief system became the ultimate superglue for larger societies. You can cooperate with a stranger not because you know them, but because you both wear the same ochre markings and believe in the same lion spirit. This allowed human cooperation to scale up beyond the band of 50, beyond the tribe of 150, into the thousands. It enabled the construction of monumental sites like Göbekli Tepe, millennia before agriculture, driven by shared belief. Let us dwell on Göbekli Tepe for a moment. In southeastern Turkey, around 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers built something that should not exist. Massive stone pillars, weighing up to 16 tons each, were quarried from bedrock, transported and erected in circular formations. The pillars are carved with images of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, rendered with astonishing skill. Though this was not a settlement, no one lived there. This was a temple, a place of gathering for something beyond survival. To build Göbekli Tepe required hundreds of people working together for years, perhaps decades, and these were not farmers with surplus grain to support a specialist class. These were hunters and gatherers living hand to mouth. Yet they chose to invest their precious calories not in better shelters or larger food stores, but in carved stone pillars. Why? The only explanation that makes sense is belief. A shared myth powerful enough to compel people to drag stones across miles of rough terrain and erect them as offerings to something invisible. This is the power of the cognitive revolution. We became capable of cooperation with strangers on a scale no other animal has achieved, bound not by kinship, but by shared stories. Ants cooperate in the millions, but they are sisters. Wolves hunt in packs, but they are family. Humans cooperate with thousands, millions, even billions of strangers, united by fictions, nations, religions, corporations, ideologies. These fictions are not lies. They are shared imaginations, and they are real in their consequences. As human populations grew and spread, the complexity of these shared fictions increased. Early humans might have believed in a single lion spirit governing their hunting grounds. Later groups developed pantheons, families of spirits or gods, each with distinct personalities and domains. The river had its god, the mountain had its god, the sun, the moon, the storm. Each was governed by an invisible agent who could be pleased, angered, bargained with. And with these gods came priests, specialists who claimed to understand the will of the unseen. This was perhaps humanity's first division of labor beyond gender. Not everyone was a priest. Only certain people, chosen by signs or training or lineage, could communicate with the spirits. And these priests accumulated power, not through physical strength, but through their monopoly on the invisible. If you control the narrative of what the gods want, you control the behavior of those who believe. The cognitive spiral tightened. Language led to symbol. Symbol led to ritual. Ritual led to religion. Religion led to hierarchy. Hierarchy led to specialization. Specialization led to innovation. Each turn of the spiral fed back into itself, accelerating the pace of change. A feedback loop had been initiated that would not stop. Art exploded during this period. The cave paintings of Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, masterpieces rendered in ochre and charcoal on the walls of deep caves far from the light of day. These were not casual doodles. The artists crawled on their bellies through narrow passages, carrying torches, mixing pigments with animal fat, and painting in the flickering firelight. The images are alive, horses galloping, bison charging, lions crouching. The artists understood perspective, shading, motion. They were not primitive, they were us. Why did they paint in such inaccessible places? We will never know for certain, but the context suggests ritual. These deep caves were liminal spaces, thresholds between the world of the living and some other realm. To descend into the cave was to enter the underworld, the spirit world, the dream time. The act of painting may have been a form of magic, an attempt to capture the essence of the animal so that the hunters could capture its body. Or perhaps it was a way to communicate with the ancestors, to record visions seen in trance states induced by rhythmic drumming, chanting, or the smoke of certain plants. The discovery of musical instruments from this era supports the idea of ritual trance. Bone flutes, carved from the wing bones of vultures, have been found in caves dating to 40,000 years ago. The flutes are sophisticated, with precisely drilled finger holes positioned to produce pentatonic scales, the same scales used in music around the world today. Someone sat by firelight, carving and testing until the sound was right. And then they played. In the echoing chamber of a cave, with the sound of a flute would have been otherworldly, haunting, a voice not quite human. Music, like language, is a uniquely human obsession. Birds sing, whales sing, but their songs are functional, territorial calls, mating displays. Human music is different. It serves no obvious survival purpose, yet every human culture ever documented makes music. We are driven to create rhythm and melody, to move our bodies in sync with sound, to lose ourselves in harmonies. Music binds groups together in ways words cannot. When people sing together, their heartbeats synchronize, their breathing aligns. They become, for a moment, a single organism, and so the spiral continued, from language to symbol, from symbol to myth, from myth to tribe, from tribe to empire. The cognitive revolution was the stone thrown into the pond of history, and the ripples are still spreading today. Every cathedral, every skyscraper, every novel, every line of code, all trace their lineage back to that moment when a voice first spoke in the dark and a hand first etched a diamond into a piece of red stone. But let us not romanticize this revolution too much. With great cognitive power came great cognitive burdens. The ability to imagine the future meant the ability to fear it. The knowledge of death, not just the immediate terror of a predator, but the abstract understanding that all life ends, became a weight on the human soul. Animals die, but they do not know they will die. Humans know. And this knowledge changes everything. The burial practices that began around 100,000 years ago and intensified after 50,000 years ago suggest a growing preoccupation with mortality. Graves were dug with care. Bodies were placed in fetal positions as if returning to the womb. Grave goods were included, tools, ornaments, food, suggesting a belief that the journey continued beyond the grave. Death was no longer an end, but a transition. The cognitive revolution had given us the burden of existential awareness, and we responded by inventing the afterlife. This fear of death may have been one of the primary drivers of human innovation. If death is inevitable, we must make our brief time meaningful. We must leave something behind. Children, yes, but also stories, monuments, art. The human drive to create is, at its core, a rebellion against mortality. We cannot escape death, but we can create things that outlive us. The paintings in the caves are 30,000 years old, and they still speak. The artists are dust, but their vision endures. And so, the cognitive revolution spiraled onward, out of Africa, across Asia, into Europe, over the Bering Land Bridge, into the Americas. By 15,000 years ago, humans had reached the southern tip of South America. In less than 60,000 years, we had colonized every habitable continent on Earth. No other large mammal had ever spread so far, so fast. We were unstoppable, not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we could think ourselves into any environment, invent solutions to any problem, and organize ourselves into groups large enough to overcome any obstacle. The world was ours, and in taking it, we transformed it utterly. Megafauna on every continent began to vanish within a few thousand years of human arrival. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, giant kangaroos, cave bears, all gone. Some scientists argue that climate change was the primary driver. Others point to human hunting. Most likely, it was both. Climate stressed the populations, and human hunting delivered the final blow. We were not yet farmers, but we were already reshaping the Earth's ecosystems on a planetary scale. The revolution reached its next phase around 12,000 years ago with the invention of agriculture. This was not a single moment of genius, but a gradual process occurring independently in multiple regions: the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, West Africa. Humans began to plant seeds, to control the reproduction of plants and animals, to settle in permanent villages. The hunter-gatherer existence, which had defined us for hundreds of thousands of years, gave way to the farmer's life. Agriculture allowed populations to grow exponentially. A hunter-gatherer woman might have a child every 4 years, spacing births to ensure she could carry her infant while foraging. A farming woman, settled in one place, could have a child every 2 years. Villages grew into towns, towns grew into cities, cities grew into civilizations. Writing was invented to keep track of grain stores and tax records. Mathematics emerged to measure fields and predict floods. Astronomy developed to track seasons for planting. And with all of this came new forms of inequality. In the hunter-gatherer band, everyone was relatively equal. There were no kings, no slaves, no rigid hierarchies. Leadership was fluid, based on skill and consensus. But agriculture created surplus, and surplus created wealth, and wealth created power. Those who controlled the surplus, the granaries, the herds, became rulers. Societies stratified into classes. Warfare became organized and deadly. Empires rose and fell. The cognitive revolution that began with a few survivors on the African coast 70,000 years ago had, by 5,000 years ago, produced the pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the cities of the Indus Valley. The stone tools had become bronze swords, the cave paintings had become written epics, the small bands had become armies of thousands, the lion spirit had become pantheons of gods demanding blood sacrifice. Was this progress? That question has no single answer. We gained comfort, security, and knowledge. We lost freedom, equality, and perhaps a certain kind of peace. The human story is not one of pure ascent from darkness to light, but a complex weaving of gains and losses, triumphs and tragedies. The revolution that made us powerful also made us restless. The mind that could imagine a better future was also cursed to see the gap between what is and what could be. We became the dissatisfied animal, forever yearning for something beyond the present moment. But pause for a moment. Let the river of time flow into a different channel. What if the revolution never happened? What if the mutation for language never took hold? What if the Toba eruption had wiped us out completely, or reduced us to a state of permanent scrambling survival, never allowing the surplus energy needed for complex culture? Close your eyes again. Feel the world shift around you. The present dissolves. We are stepping sideways now, not backward, into a timeline that never was but could have been. A world where the spark never caught, where the fire of consciousness flickered and died in the volcanic winter, leaving only embers that could not reignite. Imagine the Earth today, 2024, in a world without the human spark. The climate has warmed since the Ice Age, the glaciers retreating to the poles. The forests have reclaimed Europe. The Sahara is a green savanna once more, teeming with life. The sun rises over a planet that has forgotten us before we could become memorable. The continents have shifted imperceptibly, the tectonic plates grinding in their ancient, patient dance. Sea levels have risen and fallen with the rhythm of ice ages that came and went, unmarked by calendars, unmeasured by instruments. The Earth breathes in cycles of 10,000 years, and there is no one to count them. In this world, our Africa is still the kingdom of the megafauna. Huge herds of elephants roam the continent, their numbers in the millions, shaping the landscape by toppling trees and opening grasslands. The lion and the leopard are the apex predators, unchecked by the spear or the gun. The elephants move in matriarchal societies of 100 or more, their intelligence profound but bounded by the limits of their bodies and their ecological niche. They mourn their dead, touching the bones with their trunks in ceremonies that seem almost human, but they do not bury them, do not mark the graves, do not tell stories of those who have passed. Their grief is immediate, present, and then it fades into the background hum of existence. In the forests that blanket Europe, a different kind of majesty unfolds. Wolves hunt in packs through the ancient woods, their territories vast and unchallenged. The aurochs, massive wild cattle standing 2 meters at the shoulder, graze in clearings where no fences constrain them. The European lion, which in our timeline went extinct in antiquity, still prowls the Mediterranean scrublands, its mane golden in the slanting afternoon light. And humans? We are still here. But we are different. We are rare. Scattered bands of Homo sapiens live in the Rift Valley and perhaps along the coasts. We are naked, dark-skinned, living in harmony with the rhythm of the wild. We make simple stone tools, Hand axes, scrapers, just as our ancestors did for 1,000,000 years. We do not paint in caves. We do not bury our dead with grave goods. We do not wonder about the stars. These humans number perhaps 50,000 across the entire African continent, living in bands of 20 to 40 individuals, their territories vast and sparsely populated. They have no concept of the world beyond their immediate landscape, no curiosity about what lies over the next range of mountains or across the sea. Their world is measured in days of walking, in the distance between water sources, in the seasonal migration routes of the animals they follow. Watch them for a day. They wake with the dawn, as they always have. The fire has gone out during the night. Firekeeping is a skill they possess, but do not master with the obsessive care that our ancestors did. Sometimes they must create fire anew, a laborious process of friction and patience. More often, they simply do without, eating their food raw, sleeping cold under the stars. It is uncomfortable, but it is not tragic. It simply is. They spent their morning foraging. The women and children spread out across a familiar landscape, digging for roots, gathering nuts, plucking berries from thorny bushes. Their knowledge of plants is extensive, passed from mother to daughter through observation and imitation, but it is not formalized, not categorized. There are no names for the plants, only a vague sense of good and bad, food and not food, learned through trial and sometimes fatal error. The men hunt, or rather, they scavenge and opportunistically hunt. They lack the sophisticated projectile weapons that would allow them to hunt large game safely. Their spears are thrusting weapons, requiring them to get close enough to smell the fierce sweat of their prey. More often, they follow the vultures to a kill made by lions, waiting at a respectful distance until the big cats have eaten their fill, then rushing in to grab what they can before the hyenas arrive. We communicate, yes, with gestures, with calls, with emotional sounds. We laugh, we cry, we comfort our young. But we do not tell stories of the past. We do not plan for next year. We live in the eternal present, a state of pure being. We are just another animal in the ecosystem, neither above nor below the gazelle or the hyena. There is a kind of peace in this existence. Without language to weave narratives of past and future, there is no anxiety about what might come, no regret about what has been. When a child dies, and many children die in this world, perhaps 6 out of 10 before reaching adulthood, the mother grieves, but her grief is immediate and then it passes. There is no prolonged mourning, and no existential crisis about the meaning of death. The child is gone and the living continue living. In Europe, the Neanderthals still thrive. They have adapted to the warming world. They live in the forests of Germany and France, hunting red deer and wild boar. They are quiet, powerful, masters of their domain. They have not been pushed to extinction by an invading wave of hypersocial cousins. The Denisovans roam the vast steppes of Asia. The Neanderthals in this timeline have had 12,000 additional years to adapt and evolve. They have spread further south as the ice retreated, occupying territories from Portugal to the Black Sea. Their technology has improved incrementally. Their stone tools are slightly more refined, their use of fire more consistent. But they have not made the leap to symbolic thought. They do not create art. They do not worship. They are supremely adapted to their environment, living in a stable equilibrium with the forests that sustain them. In Asia, the Denisovans have thrived in the highlands of Tibet and the river valleys of Siberia. They are tall, lean, with adaptations to high altitude that would astonish any physiologist in our timeline, if such a profession existed. Their blood carries oxygen with extraordinary efficiency, allowing them to live and hunt at elevations where the air is thin. They move through the mountains like ghosts, hunting the wild yaks and argali sheep that roam the plateaus. On the islands of Southeast Asia, the diminutive Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits, still hunt the pygmy elephants in the tropical forests. Standing barely a meter tall, they are perfectly adapted to their island ecosystem. They're using stone tools to butcher game and living in caves overlooking the sea. Their population is small, perhaps a few thousand across the entire archipelago, stable and unchanging. And in the Americas, vast, empty, untouched by human footprints, the megafauna reign supreme. Columbian mammoths, standing 4 meters at the shoulder, migrate in herds across the Great Plains, their paths worn deep into the earth over millennia. Giant ground sloths, weighing over 3 tons, strip leaves from trees in the forests of South America. Saber-toothed cats stalk the grasslands of California. Dire wolves hunt in packs across the tundra. The world is quieter. There are no cities glowing in the night, no highways cutting through the hills, no planes striping the sky, no plastic in the oceans. The carbon dioxide levels are 280 parts per million. The silence is profound, a deep, living silence filled with the breath of a planet that is wild and whole. At night, when you stand on the African savanna in this world, the stars are overwhelming in their brightness. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light, so dense that it casts shadows on the ground below. There are no city lights to drown them out, no satellites crossing the heavens in their programmed orbits. The universe is vast and indifferent, beautiful beyond measure, and there is no one to measure it, no one to name the constellations, no one to ask what lies beyond the visible edge. The seasons turn, the rains come and go, the herds migrate, the predators hunt, the prey flee or fall. Life and death dance their ancient dance, and it is neither good nor evil, it simply is. There is no narrative arc to existence, no progress, no decline. The world exists in a state of dynamic equilibrium, shifting and changing but never transforming. Imagine walking through this world. You would see beauty everywhere, the golden light of dawn filtering through acacia trees, the power of a lion's leap, the tenderness of an elephant mother guiding her calf. But you would also see indifference. Nature does not care whether any particular creature lives or dies. The gazelle that escapes the cheetah today will be caught tomorrow or next week. The lion cub that plays in the sun will starve when its mother is gored by a buffalo. There is no justice, no mercy, no meaning beyond the immediate struggle to survive and reproduce. And the humans in this world, our cousins, our shadows, would they be happy? That question assumes a level of self-reflection they do not possess. They are not happy or unhappy. They are alive. They experience pleasure when they eat, pain when they are injured, fear when a predator approaches, comfort when they huddle together at night. But these experiences do not accumulate into a sense of self, a life story, an identity. They exist in the moment, always in the moment, and then the moment passes. It is a beautiful world, a pristine world, but it is a world without a witness. There is no one to name the stars, no one to compose a symphony, no one to ask why. It is a world of answers without questions. The rivers flow to the sea, but no one writes poems about their journey. The mountains rise and erode over millions of years, but no one records their shapes or climbs them for the sheer challenge of reaching the summit. The flowers bloom in riotous color each spring, but no one paints them or presses them between the pages of a book. The beauty is there, immense and indifferent, witnessed only by eyes that see but do not understand what they are seeing. In this world, there is no archaeology because there is nothing to excavate. The stone tools that these unawakened humans make are indistinguishable from those made by their ancestors 100,000 years ago. There are no layers of cultural innovation, no stratigraphy of ideas. The earth itself is simpler, unburdened by the accumulated debris of civilizations. There are no pottery shards, no bronze implements, no foundations of ancient temples slowly being reclaimed by roots and time. And perhaps, in some deep sense, this is a tragedy. Not for the humans in that world, They do not know what they are missing, but for the universe itself. In our timeline, in the world that actually exists, the cognitive revolution created something unique, a way for the cosmos to know itself. Through us, through our art and science and philosophy, the universe became conscious. The atoms that were forged in the hearts of dying stars arranged themselves into patterns that could ask questions about their own origins. In this alternate world, that never happened. The universe remains unconscious, beautiful but blind, full of potential that will never be realized. The information encoded in DNA continues to be copied and passed down through generations, but it never transcends itself, never becomes more than a mechanism for survival and reproduction. The complexity remains purely biological, never crossing the threshold into culture, into deliberate creation, into meaning. But there is another perspective. Perhaps this world is, in its own way, more honest. The cognitive revolution that made us human also made us liars. We became capable of imagining things that do not exist. Gods, nations, money, justice, and treating these fictions as if they were more real than the ground beneath our feet. We became capable of self-deception on a scale no other animal has achieved, convincing ourselves that we are separate from nature, above it, destined to transcend it. In the alternate world, there is no such delusion. The humans there are animals among animals, neither exalted nor debased. They kill to eat as the lion kills. They care for their young as the elephant cares. They fear death, as all living things fear death. They do not pretend to be anything other than what they are. Temporary arrangements of matter and energy, flickering briefly in the darkness before returning to the elements. The sun sets over this world, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. Somewhere on the savannah, a band of humans huddles together for warmth, their day's work done, their bellies partially full. They do not speak of tomorrow. They do not remember yesterday with any clarity. They simply exist here and now, warm bodies in the cooling evening, alive for this moment and perhaps for many more moments to come, until they are not. And the stars come out one by one in their ancient patterns. Orion rises in the east. The Southern Cross hangs low on the horizon. The planets wander their ecliptic paths, obeying laws of physics that no mind comprehends. The universe continues its expansion, racing away from itself at speeds that increase with every passing billion years, indifferent to whether anyone is watching or measuring or marveling. We return to the world that is, the world we built. The cognitive revolution was a gift and a burden. It gave us the power to become like gods, to shape the earth, to split the atom, to leave our footprints on the moon. But it also separated us from the natural flow of time. It evicted us from the garden of the eternal present. We carry the legacy of that revolution in every thought we think. When you worry about the future, that is the echo of the first planner storing water for a drought. When you get lost in a book, that is the echo of the first storyteller by the fire. When you look at the stars and feel a sense of awe, that is the echo of the first mind that looked up and realized the universe was vast. The revolution is not over. We are still evolving. We are still changing. Our tools are no longer stone, but silicon and light. Our tribes are global. Our language is digital. But the fundamental questions remain the same. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Perhaps the revolution was inevitable. Perhaps the universe, in its infinite complexity, eventually produces a mind capable of reflecting upon itself. Perhaps we are the universe's way of knowing itself. Or perhaps it was a cosmic accident, a roll of evolutionary dice that came up with a particular number only once in the 4 billion-year history of life on this planet. We may never know. But what we do know is that something extraordinary happened in the depths of the African Ice Age, something that separated us forever from the world of instinct and immediacy and gave us the burden and the gift of consciousness. consider what was lost in that transformation. The other animals still live in a state we can barely remember, a state of pure presence, of being without becoming. A lion does not worry about whether it was a good lion yesterday or whether it will be remembered as a great lion after it dies. It simply is. There is a kind of perfection in that, a completeness that we can only glimpse in rare moments of flow, of meditation, of absorption in the present. We traded that perfection for something else, for the ability to learn from the past and plan for the future, for the ability to imagine worlds that do not exist and then bring them into being, for the ability to look at the night sky and ask not just what, but why. We became time travelers, but in doing so, we lost our citizenship in the eternal now. And yet, what we gained. The ability to love someone who is not present. The ability to mourn someone who died before we were born. The ability to work toward a goal we will never see completed, planting trees in whose shade we will never sit. The ability to feel kinship with people on the other side of the planet whom we will never meet. The revolution expanded our circle of empathy from the immediate band to the entire species, and perhaps one day to all living things. The cognitive revolution gave us language, and language gave us the power to lie, but also the power to promise. It gave us the ability to betray, but also the ability to forgive. It gave us the capacity for hatred, but also for love that transcends death. Every tool can be used to build or to destroy. The revolution did not make us good or evil. It made us capable of choosing. As you lie here, safe in the comfort of the modern world, remember the journey. Remember the bottleneck. Remember the survivors who walked out of Africa carrying the seed of everything we are. Remember that you are the result of an unbroken chain of survival, of innovation, of love, stretching back 70,000 years and beyond. You are the latest chapter in a story that began in fire and stone. The same neurons that allowed your ancestors to imagine tomorrow are firing now, allowing you to imagine anything. The same capacity for symbolic thought that let them see a bead as more than a shell lets you see these words as more than shapes. You are not separate from that ancient world. You are its continuation. You are the arrow it shot into the future, and that future is still being written. The cognitive revolution that began 70,000 years ago has not ended. We are still in the midst of it, still discovering what it means to be a conscious creature in an unconscious universe. Every act of creativity, every moment of compassion, every question we ask about the nature of reality, these are all ripples from that original awakening spreading outward through time. What will we become? We cannot know. The humans who painted in the caves of Lascaux could not have imagined their descendants walking on the moon. The survivors of Toba could not have imagined cities of glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Perhaps our descendants, 1,000 generations from now, will look back at us the way we look back at the cave painters, with affection and wonder, but also with the recognition that we were only at the beginning of understanding what consciousness can do. The fire that was lit in the Stone Age still burns within you. The curiosity, the wonder, the dream, but also the vulnerability, the fear, the knowledge that all things end. The cognitive revolution gave us the gift of knowing we will die, and with it, the urgent drive to make our brief spark of existence mean something. That drive built the pyramids and wrote the symphonies. It sent explorers to the edges of the known world, and scientists to the edges of the knowable. It made us builders and dreamers, artists and philosophers. And now, as you drift towards sleep, feel the weight of deep time settling over you like a blanket. You are connected to everything that came before. The carbon in your bones was forged in the heart of a dying star billions of years ago. The water in your cells once fell as rain on the African savanna when your ancestors walked beneath it. The patterns of electrical activity in your brain are the descendants of patterns that first sparked in the firelight of a Stone Age camp. Sleep now. Let the mind rest. Let the questions fade. The ancient world is always there, waiting in the silence of your DNA. The savannah is quiet. The stars are bright. The journey is done, but not finished. Never finished. Each time you wake, you carry the revolution forward. Each time you choose kindness over cruelty, curiosity over certainty, wonder over cynicism, you honor the survivors who gave you this moment. You are their dream made real. You are the answer to the question they never had words to ask. The story continues. The spiral unwinds. The future is unwritten, stretching out before us like the African horizon, stretching out before the first humans who stood upright and looked beyond the next hill. What lies ahead, we cannot know. But we will walk toward it as our ancestors did, with tools in hand and fire in our hearts and stories on our tongues. And for now, in this moment, there is only rest. Only the gentle rhythm of breath. Only the quiet darkness that held the universe before the first star ignited and will hold it again when the last star dies. You are a pattern of light briefly lit against that darkness. Shine gently. Rest deeply. The dawn will come again as it always has, bringing with it another day, another chance to be human, to be conscious, to be alive. And whenever you're ready to explore another world, we'll be here.